There's a voice that speaks before words. It does not come from the lips, nor even from the mind. It rises from the quiet depths beneath awareness, from that region where thought is not yet born, but already shimmering with intention. Steiner called it the living word, the current of consciousness itself before it crystallizes into language. Most people never hear it. They mistake the noise of the intellect for thought and the chatter of personality for self. But beneath that surface current, something older, truer, and infinitely gentle murmurs. It is the soul, speaking its native tongue, silence. The modern human being fears silence because it exposes what speech conceals. In the absence of words, we begin to feel. And feeling, for the untrained soul, can be unbearable. We fill our hours with sound, with dialogue, with internal commentary, not to express ourselves, but to drown out the echo of what lies beneath. Yet the soul does not speak through volume. It speaks through vibration, through rhythm, through resonance. Its messages arrive as sensations, intuitions, and sudden clarity. They are not commands, but invitations. The language of the soul is not made of grammar, but of presence. Steiner warned that to live entirely in the realm of spoken language is to exile oneself from the living cosmos. Words, once symbols of creation, have become currency of distraction. We use them to control, to explain, to shield ourselves from the raw immediacy of experience. But in doing so, we forget their origin. In the beginning was the Word, says the Gospel of John. But Steiner added, and before the Word there was listening. Consciousness itself began as listening. Creation began as response to silence. To hear this inner voice requires a different kind of attention, one that listens not outwardly but inwardly, not for meaning but for movement. You close your eyes, and instead of focusing on the noise of your thoughts, you watch how they rise. Somewhere in that space between impulse and articulation, you sense a pulse, a rhythm like breathing. It is not yours. It is the breathing of the universe through you. If you stay with it long enough, words begin to dissolve into light and light into understanding. This is the first threshold of the secret language of the soul. Steiner compared this process to tuning an instrument. The intellect, when left unchecked, becomes dissonant. Its strings too tight, vibrating with anxiety. But through meditation, reverence, and moral clarity, the instrument begins to resonate again with the cosmic tone that created it. The soul is not separate from the world. It is one note in the great symphony of being. When you hear the inner voice, you are not hearing yourself. You are hearing the whole sing through your form. This is why true silence is terrifying to most, because in that stillness, the illusion of separateness begins to crumble. You realize that your thoughts are not private. They are waves in a vast sea of consciousness. Your emotions are not personal storms. They are the weather of the world passing through you. To listen deeply is to risk remembering that you were never an isolated mind, but a fragment of a cosmic sentence still being spoken. The soul's voice reveals not individuality, but participation. Steiner called this capacity spiritual hearing. It is not the hearing of sound, but of meaning, not through the ear, but through moral resonance. It is how prophets heard revelation, how artists hear form before color, how lovers sense truth before speech. Every great act of creation begins with this listening. When you hear the inner word, you're standing at the same threshold where God once said, "Let there be." The difference is that now it is you who must decide what will be created through your attention. Modern neuroscience hints at this mystery. It shows that perception precedes awareness, that the brain begins to respond before the conscious mind interprets. Steiner would say, of course, the soul always hears first. Consciousness merely translates. What we call intuition is the ancient language of the spirit surfacing for a moment through the static of thought. To live spiritually is to lengthen that moment, to make the whisper of eternity the foundation of daily perception. But beware, he said, for once the soul begins to speak, it will demand honesty. It will no longer tolerate noise disguised as knowledge. You will find yourself withdrawing from empty talk, craving simplicity, stillness, authenticity. This is not isolation. It is tuning. The world becomes unbearable only until your inner hearing adjusts to the new frequency. Then slowly, even the chaos of the city, the hum of machines, the fragments of conversation begin to sound different. Beneath them all, you hear the same hum, the eternal syllable of being. And so, the first lesson of the secret language is not to learn to speak, but to learn to listen so deeply that the distinction between sound and silence disappears. For in that depth, something ancient awakens, the recognition that before speech, before thought, before even identity, there was vibration. And that vibration was you, and is still you, waiting patiently beneath all noise to be heard again. There was a time when humanity could still hear itself think, not the superficial noise of intellect, but the quiet current beneath it, the pulse of consciousness that connected every breath to the cosmos. Steiner said that in those early epochs, before reason became our master, the inner word was as audible to the soul as thunder to the ear. People spoke less because they knew more. They did not need to explain. They participated. Thought was communion, not commentary. But as the centuries unfolded, something sacred fell asleep. Humanity began to mistake thinking for hearing and speaking for knowing. The soul's language faded into the background hum of forgotten divinity. This forgetting was not accidental. It was necessary. Consciousness, like a seed, had to be buried in darkness to grow roots. Humanity had to lose direct contact with spirit to gain individuality. The gods withdrew so that man could stand alone. But in that divine absence, the silence of the soul was replaced with the noise of self. What once was inner melody became inner monologue. The cosmic voice was drowned by the echoes of ego. Steiner saw this not as punishment, but as initiation, a descent into deafness so that freedom could be born. For only when you can no longer hear the divine do you begin to seek it out of your own will. The modern mind, he said, is the final stage of this exile. We live surrounded by words, and yet our inner world is mute. The voice of the soul still speaks, but we have forgotten its grammar. It does not use nouns or verbs. It speaks through feeling, timing, vibration. Yet our education teaches us only to trust what can be measured. And so, the subtle currents that guide meaning, the weight of a pause, the rhythm of breath, the quiver before tears, are dismissed as noise. We have trained ourselves to be deaf to nuance. The inner word, once our compass, now barely flickers beneath the static of thought. This deafness has consequences. A soul that cannot hear itself eventually stops believing it exists. That is the hidden sickness of our age. Not doubt, but disconnection. We build philosophies to explain meaning's absence, forgetting that meaning was never absent, only unheard. We search for transcendence in drugs, ideologies, and screens, all to recreate the pulse we once felt naturally in silence. Steiner called this the disease of abstraction, the substitution of symbols for presence. We no longer experience the sacred, we analyze it. We no longer listen to truth, we quote it. The word of the soul has become a fossil we study instead of a flame we follow. Yet even in this forgetting, traces remain. Sometimes when the noise of the world momentarily falters, in the hush before dawn, in a fragment of music, in the gaze of a child, something stirs inside us. A memory half-formed like déjà vu. We cannot name it, but we feel it. I have heard this before, that tremor is the inner word remembering itself. Steiner said that this sensation is not nostalgia, but invitation. A call to return inward, to reclaim the lost dialogue with being. The moment you respond, even with the faintest attention, the silence begins to speak again. He often compared modern humanity to a person who has forgotten how to dream. The dreams still happen, but consciousness no longer enters them. Similarly, the soul continues to speak, but the intellect cannot descend deeply enough to listen. We skim the surface of life, mistaking information for understanding. The result is an epidemic of emptiness, a hunger for depth that cannot be filled by explanation. Only listening, real inner listening, can heal it. Science, in its own way, confirms our amnesia. Studies show how constant stimulation rewires the brain to expect noise. Silence becomes unbearable because it forces awareness to face itself. But in spiritual science, silence is medicine. Steiner said that when the soul re-enters silence consciously, it reclaims its ancient hearing. Each quiet moment restores a fragment of forgotten language. Over time, these fragments gather, forming a melody that begins to guide life again. To remember the inner word is not to hear voices from heaven, it is to feel alignment. It is the intuition that arrives before thought, the sudden peace that precedes decision. The soul does not persuade, it vibrates. Its language is not argument, but coherence. The more you live truthfully, the more that inner tone steadies. And when it does, life itself begins to move differently, not as chaos, but as composition. Events arrange themselves like music, each experience entering in perfect rhythm. The world becomes a text written in resonance. But remembering is costly. To hear again, you must unlearn. Every distraction must be sacrificed, every false certainty burned. The intellect will resist, calling silence emptiness, intuition fantasy. Yet beyond that resistance lies freedom. Not the freedom to say whatever you want, but the freedom to hear what you're truly meant to say. The soul's word waits patiently for this moment, as if the universe itself has been holding its breath since you last listened. Steiner said that the evolution of humanity would one day bring speech and silence back into balance. Words will once again carry light instead of noise, and listening will become humanity's highest art. When that day comes, conversation will be communion, and thought will once again serve as translation for what the heart already knows. Until then, each of us must begin alone, closing the door, turning off the noise, and asking the oldest question, can you still hear yourself? For in the end, the forgetting of the inner word is only temporary. Beneath the intellect's static, the whisper never ceased. The soul has been speaking all along, softly, patiently, waiting for the moment when silence would become unbearable enough to be sought again. And when you finally listen, the first thing you'll hear is not sound but recognition, the unmistakable awareness that you were never truly alone. Before the alphabet, before ink and parchment, before the mind learned to divide meaning from sound, Language was not spoken. It was sung. The ancients did not talk about the world, they resonated with it. Steiner said that in humanity's earliest epics, every word was an act of creation, and every tone carried moral weight. To speak was to sculpt the invisible. Sound did not describe life, it moved it. The voice was still sacred then, a bridge between spirit and matter, a vibration that linked breath to cosmos. But as man's awareness descended into intellect, this sacred tongue fragmented. What once connected him to the divine became merely communication. The living word became vocabulary. In the mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and the East, initiates were taught to recover fragments of that cosmic language. They did not learn grammar, they learned attunement. Each vowel corresponded to an element, each consonant to a gesture of creation. When uttered with inner precision, these sounds could shape forces within the soul. Steiner explained that the ancients heard the world differently. They did not hear frequencies, they heard beings. Thunder was not meteorology, but dialogue. Wind was not motion, but message. The earth spoke, and the human heart replied in harmony. Modern science, though blind to spirit, still bears witness to this lost symphony. The phenomenon of cymatics, matter-forming patterns under vibration, reveals a truth the ancients knew intuitively. Sound shapes form. Steiner went further, saying that consciousness shapes sound. The purity of the soul determines the harmony of its voice. That is why words of truth heal, and words of hatred corrode. Every tone carries intention, and intention carves reality. To speak without awareness is to cast shadows into creation. In the early Atlantean ages, he said, humanity still possessed the Ur language, a primal resonance in which tone, color, and meaning were one. People could see, sound, and hear light. This synesthetic perception was not imagination, but the natural functioning of spirit in matter. Each word vibrated through the body like light through crystal. When spoken rightly, it summoned the presence of what it named. To say water was to call forth its being. To speak sun was to commune with its life. That was language before Babel, before mind divided heaven from earth. But evolution demanded forgetting. As individuality deepened, this collective language fractured into tongues, dialects, alphabets, each a shard of the original whole. The word was externalized, its magic drained into form. The power of creation was replaced by description. Humanity no longer sang the world into being, it merely reported on it. The sacred dialogue became monologue. The soul, once fluent in cosmic resonance, began to stutter. Steiner said that remnants of this ancient speech still echo in art, prayer, and music. When a symphony stirs the heart, when poetry feels alive beyond its grammar, the soul remembers. It is why a melody can move you without meaning, why a sacred chant can awaken tears you cannot explain. The vibration bypasses intellect and speaks directly to the subtle body, the same body that once conversed with stars. This is the echo of the ancient tongue, reverberating through the modern heart. The mysteries sought to keep that echo alive. In Eleusis, initiates were made to descend into darkness until they could hear light again. In Egypt, priests spoke the name of Ra, only through breath, never voice, so that it would remain living. In early Christian Gnosticism, words like logos and Sophia were not theology but code, reminders that wisdom and sound were one. Steiner himself tried to revive this practice through eurythmy, the art of visible speech, where movement embodies the spiritual gesture behind each phoneme. Through it, he showed that language is not noise but choreography, the dance of consciousness articulating form. When you speak unconsciously, words fall like ashes. When you speak from the soul, words become flame. The ancients knew this, which is why they spoke so little. They understood that speech changes reality, and silence preserves it. In the modern world, language has lost its weight. We talk endlessly and mean almost nothing, but the soul still listens for tone. It knows when truth vibrates, even when the words are clumsy. That is why a single sentence spoken from love can heal, while volumes of logic can wound. The language of the soul measures not grammar, but resonance. Science calls it frequency. Mysticism calls it vibration. Steiner called it living thought. The closer thought aligns with moral will, the clearer its sound in the etheric world. When you think truthfully, you sing silently. When you lie, the tone falters. Each human being, he said, is an instrument in the cosmic orchestra, and every thought is a note contributing to the world's harmony or dissonance. The tragedy of modernity is not that God is silent, but that humanity has gone out of tune. To reclaim the ancient language is not to learn new words. It is to restore purity to speech, to mean what you say, to feel before you speak, to listen before you answer. These are sacred acts. When word and being align, reality responds. You rediscover the creative power of utterance, the ability to call forth healing, peace, and truth simply through moral vibration. This is the first step in reviving the Ur language, to let sound, once again, serve light. The echo of the ancient tongue still moves through everything that lives. You can hear it in the hum of bees, in the heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet, in the sigh of your own breath. It is the same vibration that created galaxies, now whispering through your blood. The soul has never stopped speaking this language. Only your attention has drifted away. Listen closely enough, and even silence begins to sing. And Steiner said that emotions are not storms to be endured, but words spoken by the soul in its most ancient dialect. Joy, grief, anger, awe. These are not random impulses of the nervous system. They are grammar, syntax, and tone in the language that the spirit uses to communicate with the human being. Before the intellect learned to define, the heart already knew how to speak. Feeling was humanity's first alphabet. Each sensation carried meaning. Each mood was a message. To feel was to understand, and to understand was to participate in life's interior rhythm. But as thinking grew louder, this grammar was forgotten. The modern world replaced the depth of emotion with the precision of language, not realizing that emotion was language itself, older, richer, and infinitely wiser. In the beginning, the heart was fluent. It could distinguish the shades of tenderness in a breeze, the sorrow folded into rain. Early man did not analyze beauty. He felt it, and through that feeling entered communion with the divine. The shiver before lightning, the quiet after a funeral, the joy that wells for no reason, all were forms of speech. Steiner described this as living semantics, where every emotion was a verb, an act of being in movement. Anger said, something sacred has been violated. Sorrow said, something eternal is changing form. Love said, remember that you are not alone. These were not abstractions, but direct transmissions from the soul to consciousness. But humanity learned to fear feeling. We began to associate vulnerability with weakness, passion with danger, sadness with failure. Our schools teach the mind to classify. Our culture teaches the body to suppress, and thus the soul, denied its language, begins to stutter. We suffer not from too much emotion, but from emotions we can no longer interpret. Depression, anxiety, numbness, these are not diseases of the psyche, but miscommunications of the spirit. They are letters unopened, messages misread. Steiner wrote that the human being suffers because the heart speaks a language the mind no longer remembers. To relearn this grammar, he said, one must return to the temple of sensation. Close your books and listen to your body. Feel the weight of breath, the temperature of thought, the taste of stillness behind pain. Emotions are not enemies. They are translators between the mortal and the divine. Every time you allow yourself to feel consciously without judgment or avoidance, you are decoding another syllable of the soul's secret script. The goal is not to escape emotion, but to awaken within it, to become bilingual in the tongues of heaven and earth. Modern science hints at this truth. Neuropsychology shows that emotions guide decision-making, memory, and perception. The heart, it seems, contains its own neurons, a second brain. Steiner would smile at that discovery. He had already said that thinking itself, if pure enough, is a feeling. The difference between intellect and intuition is temperature. One is cold light, the other is light warmed by love. The task of the modern soul is not to extinguish emotion in pursuit of clarity, but to temper clarity with compassion. To feel is not to fall, it is to rise into relationship with life itself. But the grammar of feeling has its rules, and Steiner was clear about them. The first is truthfulness. Every emotion must be acknowledged as it is, not as you wish it to be. To disguise anger as patience or sadness as strength is to falsify the text of your own being. The second is reverence. Do not exploit your emotions for attention or power. Each feeling is sacred. To manipulate it is to profane the altar of the heart. The third is balance. Feeling must serve insight, not drown it. The waters of emotion purify only when they flow, not when they flood. These are not moral commandments, but acoustics, the resonance that keeps the soul's music clear. Steiner taught that in the higher worlds, feeling becomes light. Every emotion, when fully experienced and transmuted, turns into color, tone, and form. What we call art is a faint memory of this transformation. The painter translates joy into hue, the musician translates sorrow into sound. Each is performing a sacred act of translation, turning the inner language of feeling into symbols the world can understand. When we encounter great art and feel inexplicable tears, it is the soul recognizing its own speech spoken back to it. To live anthroposophically is to live as an artist of consciousness, to treat every feeling as material for creation. The key is awareness. Feel anger, but as an artisan shaping fire. Feel love, but as a sculptor molding warmth into form. In this way, emotion becomes expression, and expression becomes revelation. Nothing is wasted. Every shade of feeling is clay for transformation. In our mechanized age, where emotion is reduced to chemical imbalance or social performance, Steiner's words strike like prophecy. The soul has not grown silent. It has been gagged by analysis. We are told to manage emotions, to regulate them, to label them with diagnostics. But the soul does not want regulation. It wants relationship. The cure for emotional suffering is not control, but conversation. Ask your fear what it protects. Ask your sadness what it longs for. Ask your joy what it wants to give. These questions reopen the channel between consciousness and spirit. the forgotten grammar lesson of eternity. When you finally learn to read feeling again, life begins to speak everywhere. You sense the moral tone of a room, the hidden sadness behind laughter, the truth concealed in hesitation. You realize that the world is not mute. It is murmuring endlessly in emotional language, waiting for a listener. And in that moment, your heart remembers the first alphabet, the one written in pulse, rhythm, and light. For the soul does not think in words, it feels in sentences. And the one who learns to feel consciously becomes fluent once more in the secret language that built the stars. If sound is the body of language, then silence is its soul. Steiner taught that what is not said carries more power than what is spoken, because silence is the space where meaning breathes. Every sentence, every thought, every prayer depends upon the pauses that hold it together. The word, he said, was born from the womb of silence, and it returns there after it has fulfilled its purpose. Between two words lives a secret door through which the human being can step back into the divine. But modern man fears that door. He rushes to fill every pause, as if quiet were an enemy to conquer. The result is a civilization that speaks ceaselessly and says almost nothing. Steiner once wrote that the soul speaks in whispers, and the spirit listens only in stillness. When the mind is noisy, the truth cannot enter. This is why the mysteries demanded long periods of silence before initiation. Silence is not absence, it is concentration. It gathers energy the way lungs gather breath. In those ancient schools, disciples were trained to hear the pauses within the music of the world, the heartbeat between thunder and echo, the calm before dawn, the still moment when a candle's flame no longer flickers. In those intervals, reality reveals its pulse. To dwell in such silence is to feel the universe inhale, but our age has forgotten the discipline of stillness. Noise has become our anesthesia. We drown the terror of meaninglessness beneath conversation, entertainment, data. Even our thoughts speak too loudly. The internal monologue has replaced prayer. Yet behind that static, the soul waits patiently, as it has for centuries, for a single moment of true listening. Steiner said that 1 minute of genuine silence heals more than hours of forced meditation. For in that instant, the mind ceases to echo itself and begins to mirror the cosmos. To rediscover silence, one must first understand that it is not emptiness, but structure. Just as music depends on rests and art on negative space, consciousness requires intervals of stillness to perceive itself. Silence gives form to awareness. Without it, experience collapses into noise. Flat, relentless, meaningless. In the rhythm of spirit, silence is the downbeat that gives shape to every act of creation. Even the gods, Steiner said, rest between their breaths. Science, without knowing it, has begun to confirm this metaphysical law. Neurologists have found that moments of stillness reorganize the brain, allowing memory and perception to integrate. The mind, like a forest after storm, needs quiet to grow. Steiner would say that silence is not a passive state, but a living element, a substance in which thought becomes transparent and light passes through. To practice silence consciously is to polish the mirror of the soul until it reflects truth without distortion. But silence has its dangers. It exposes everything you hide beneath sound. The moment you enter it, the suppressed voices of your being begin to speak. The grief you ignored, the fear you disguised, the longing you denied. This is why people flee from quiet rooms, why solitude feels unbearable. In silence, the masks fall away. The soul begins to speak in its true tone, and at first it does not sing, it weeps. Yet Steiner insisted that this weeping is sacred. It is the sound of the soul remembering its original language. Once the tears subside, something extraordinary happens. The silence changes texture. It is no longer heavy, but radiant. You begin to sense presence, not yours, not another's, but the presence of being itself. The air feels alive, the space luminous. You realize that silence was never empty, it was listening. The universe, it seems, has been waiting for you to stop speaking so it could finally answer. Steiner called this moment the meeting with the inner logos, when human awareness becomes conscious of the cosmic word within it. He compared it to standing at the edge of a vast ocean at night. You cannot see the water, but you can hear its rhythm in the dark. Each wave is a breath of the eternal. You do not need to understand it, you only need to feel its pattern. To dwell in silence is to let that rhythm reorder you. Slowly, the chaos of thought aligns with the cosmic pulse. The self becomes instrument again, and out of that alignment, speech returns, but different now. Your words have weight, not because they are loud, but because they were born in stillness. In the practice of anthroposophy, silence is not retreat, it is preparation. Steiner said that true speech begins only after silence has been mastered. The teacher who cannot pause cannot teach. The artist who cannot wait cannot create. The lover who cannot listen cannot love. Every act of expression draws its power from the stillness that precedes it. That is why sacred texts, music, and prayer all begin in quiet. Silence purifies intention. It transforms communication into communion. If you wish to hear the language of the soul, listen to the pauses between your thoughts. Notice the spaces in conversation where truth hides. Feel the breath between sentences as if it were divine punctuation. The soul writes its messages in these gaps. The intellect reads the letters, the heart reads the silence, and when you finally learn to hear it, you discover that silence is not the absence of speech, but the origin of it, the eternal background against which all creation resonates. In the end, silence is the purest word. It contains everything that language tries to say. Steiner's wisdom lingers here, in the interval between his sentences, reminding us that revelation does not thunder, it whispers. And the soul, when it finally remembers how to listen, hears what the world has been saying all along, that God never stopped speaking. We simply forgot to pause long enough to understand. The body is not a cage for the soul, it is its language. Every gesture, every illness, every tremor of breath is a syllable in the dialogue between spirit and matter. Steiner taught that the human form is the alphabet through which the invisible writes itself into the visible world. Your heartbeat is punctuation, your hands verbs, your spine, the sacred sentence that links heaven and earth. We imagine the body as something we possess. In truth, it is something that speaks us. To ignore its voice is to silence the oldest conversation in creation, the conversation between the soul that dreams and the body that remembers. When a thought is unexpressed, it settles in the muscles. When a feeling is denied, it descends into the organs. Over time, the unspoken becomes symptom. The body, faithful servant of the spirit, carries what the mind refuses to confront. Steiner said that sickness in its deepest sense is not punishment but communication. Every imbalance, every ache, every sudden fatigue is a message from the soul written in flesh. We rush to medicate, to silence pain, not realizing that pain itself is a form of speech. It is the spirit saying, "Listen, you have forgotten me here." Ancient healing traditions understood this intimately. Egyptian priests, Greek physicians, Indian sages all saw illness as misalignment between inner tone and outer form. The cure was not to fight the body, but to retune it. Steiner continued this lineage through spiritual medicine, teaching that organs are not mechanisms, but beings, each with moral and cosmic significance. The liver, he said, is patience condensed, the lungs, the will to trust, the heart, the temple of courage. When these virtues falter in consciousness, their corresponding organs weaken. Disease begins as spiritual dissonance long before it manifests as matter. Modern science glimpses fragments of this truth. Psychosomatic medicine admits that emotion shapes biology. Trauma research shows that memory lives in tissue. Neuroscience speaks of the gut brain, the heart brain, but Steiner saw beyond the metaphor. For him, the entire human body is an image of the cosmos condensed into living geometry. The head reflects the stars, pure thought, crystalline, cold. The chest mirrors the sun, rhythm, breath, heart. The limbs echo the earth, will, movement, action. Through this triad, the soul speaks. When your head aches, your thinking is imprisoned. When your heart races, your feeling seeks balance. When your limbs tremble, your will has lost direction. The body never lies, it only translates. This is why spiritual growth cannot be achieved by intellect alone. You cannot ascend to higher worlds if your body remains unlistened to. The spirit must descend as deeply as it ascends. Steiner said that enlightenment that ignores the body is only half a revelation. Light without gravity. To incarnate fully is the true initiation. To feel the sacred pulse within the pulse, to sense that your bones hum the same frequency as mountain stone, that your blood repeats the rhythm of tides. This is the soul remembering its instrument. Every movement, consciously done, becomes invocation. When you stand upright, you repeat the gesture of cosmic becoming. The moment the universe rose from chaos and declared, "I am." When you breathe deeply, you enact the eternal rhythm of creation. Inhalation as incarnation, exhalation as return. Even suffering has choreography. The body bends, breaks, and heals to teach humility. The soul speaks through these postures, not in words, but in wisdom carved into experience. Yet in the mechanized age, we treat the body as machine. We silence its signals with noise, numb its messages with screens and stimulants. We outsource its wisdom to devices that count our steps and monitor our sleep. But numbers cannot interpret meaning. A pulse measured is not a pulse understood. Steiner warned that, as we alienate ourselves from the living conversation of the body, we lose the bridge to spirit, for the soul's first whisper is always physical. Before it speaks to the mind, it trembles in the flesh. To relearn this language, one must observe without resistance. When pain arises, ask it, "What are you trying to say?" When tension appears, ask, "What truth am I withholding?" When exhaustion descends, ask, "What part of me longs for stillness?" These questions turn suffering into dialogue. The moment you listen without judgment, the symptom begins to soften. Understanding is its medicine. Steiner's movement art, eurythmy, was born from this principle, a practice where the human body performs the sounds of the soul. Each motion becomes a letter, each gesture a word in the great sentence of creation. To watch it is to see language become visible, as if thought itself were dancing. The purpose was not performance, but reconciliation, to teach the body to speak again in harmony with spirit. Through such movement, illness transforms into rhythm, and rhythm becomes prayer. The body is honest, but not cruel. It does not wish to punish, it wishes to be heard. When you listen, truly listen, it forgives instantly. The heartbeat steadies, the breath deepens, the weight lifts. You feel alignment, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. The soul has spoken and the body has understood. Steiner said that the highest form of health is transparency, when the body becomes so attuned that spirit shines through it unobstructed. The eyes grow clear, the voice gentle, and the movements precise yet effortless. Such a person radiates coherence. They are not perfect, they are integrated. Their body no longer resists the soul, it reveals it. And so, the next time your body falters, do not ask only how to fix it. Ask what it is trying to tell you. For every ache is an accent, every scar a word in the story of awakening. The soul has been writing in your flesh since before you were born, composing through sensation the poem of your existence. The question is not whether it speaks, but whether you still remember how to read. When the body sleeps, the soul awakens. What we call dreams, Steiner said, are not illusions of the brain, but the nightly curriculum of the spirit. Each night, consciousness steps beyond the walls of flesh and enters a vast classroom where symbols replace sentences and silence teaches in images. The rational mind, chained by daylight, cannot follow. It calls these visions nonsense. But the soul, ancient and fluent in this language, understands every lesson. Dreams are not chaos, they are communication. The forgotten schooling of eternity continuing in secret while the waking world forgets it exists. In this night school of the spirit, the soul reviews the day just lived. Every emotion becomes material for instruction. The anger you ignored, the love you restrained, the fear you denied, all return as symbolic dramas. You find yourself climbing endless stairs, drowning in water, flying through cities of light. Each scene is not random, but moral geometry, an image that balances what the waking self could not integrate. Dreams are the handwriting of the higher self, correcting the grammar of consciousness. Steiner said that if we could remember our dreams with full clarity, we would never need teachers. For every soul instructs itself each night in the laws of becoming. The ancients knew this. The Egyptians kept dream temples where priests guided the initiate into sacred sleep, asking questions of the gods through the symbolic dialogue of the unconscious. In Greece, at the temple of Asclepius, healing came through dreams, not medicine. The dreamer would lie upon the stone floor and in visions receive precise images of their ailment's origin and cure. These rituals were not superstition. They were cooperation with the cosmos. Humanity still possessed the capacity to interpret its own symbols, to understand that the divine speaks through images, because the image bypasses intellect and strikes directly at truth. Modern science, of course, calls dreams neural housekeeping. But even its language betrays awe. The brain processes emotion, consolidates memory, rebalances perception. In other words, it integrates meaning. Steiner would smile. The spirit has always used the mind as its laboratory. What psychology calls random is simply the higher world wearing the mask of physiology. The dream's power lies precisely in its resistance to literal interpretation. Its symbols are multidimensional. To analyze them is to flatten them. To live them is to awaken. Steiner taught that during sleep, the soul leaves the physical and etheric bodies, journeying into the astral and spiritual realms. There, it encounters the patterns behind events, the archetypes shaping destiny. The people you meet in dreams are not always themselves. They are parts of you, or echoes of beings beyond the threshold. Sometimes you are taught by your own future. Sometimes by presences the mind can barely comprehend. Upon returning to the body, the soul carries fragments of this encounter. They manifest as images, sensations, intuitions, the dream's residue. Most forget instantly because the intellect, upon waking, cannot translate the fluid syntax of spirit into linear thought. But the impression remains, shaping mood and decision invisibly. To remember dreams, one must cultivate reverence. The morning, Steiner said, should begin not with rush, but with remembrance. Before rising, linger between worlds. Ask, what visited me? Do not force recall, but feel instead the emotional tone left behind. Peace, fear, sorrow, exaltation. That feeling is the message in its purest form. Write it down without analysis. Over time, patterns emerge, revealing the continuity between sleeping and waking life. The barrier between them begins to thin. You realize that you have never truly stopped dreaming, only changed the density of perception. Steiner called this process conscious dreaming, though it is deeper than lucid dreaming. It is the art of participating in the soul's education. The dreamer learns to recognize the symbolic teacher at work, the serpent that tests courage, the door that invites surrender, the light that blinds yet heals. These are not fictions, but spiritual realities expressed in imagery suited to your understanding. To walk consciously through dreams is to attend the classroom of gods. There are also collective dreams, those visions that entire societies share without knowing it. The myths of nations, the archetypes of history, the fears of civilizations. These too are lessons, written on the blackboard of time. Steiner warned that humanity, if it forgets the moral dimension of dreaming, will begin to dream unconsciously on a global scale, manifesting nightmares as politics and industry. Every war, he said, begins as a dream unexamined. Only through awakening within the collective dream can humanity alter its destiny. Dreams, then, are not escape, but responsibility. Each night, your soul converses with the world's soul, adjusting, refining, creating coherence. The spirits of wisdom, he said, meet you there not as external masters, but as your own higher aspects returning to instruct their reflection in matter. To ignore dreams is to neglect your most sacred education. The night school of the spirit is open to all, but attended by few. We dismiss its lessons because they are written in the language of paradox, not proof. Yet beneath every dream's surface lies an echo of eternity reminding you that the veil between worlds is thinner than sleep. When you wake, you do not leave the dream. You enter another one, slower and denser, called reality. The goal is not to choose between them, but to learn to be conscious in both. Steiner said that the highest initiation occurs when waking life itself becomes dreamlike, not unreal, but transparent. When every object, every encounter, every moment feels symbolic, charged with meaning. Then, at last, the student of spirit graduates from the night school. He no longer needs sleep to commune with the divine, for the language of dreams has merged with the language of waking life. The world itself becomes revelation, and every heartbeat is a lesson. Once, words carried light. They were born in silence, shaped by reverence and released with intention. Each syllable contained warmth, like breath on winter air, fleeting yet alive. But as the world grew louder, Steiner said, language began to decay. Its vibration dimmed, its moral weight dissolved. What had once summoned spirit became tool of manipulation. Humanity, drunk on intellect, learned to speak without listening, to name without knowing, to explain what it no longer experienced. The sacred current of speech, that bridge between soul and creation, was hijacked by machinery. The tongue that once blessed began to betray. We live now amid a babel of noise. Words multiply, but meaning thins. Our languages, once organic and radiant, are now digital ghosts. Symbols stripped of soul, transmitted by screens that flicker but never feel. Steiner foresaw this mechanization, a time when humanity would speak to itself through devices, faster than thought, but emptier than silence. He warned that when words lose their living connection to moral imagination, they become shells, lifeless sound devoid of creative force. What once invoked angels now summons algorithms. The distortion began, he said, when speech ceased to be prayer. In the ancient mysteries, to speak was to risk transformation. Priests spent years learning the moral geometry of tone, for one mispronounced word could unbalance the etheric world. The vowel was breath, life itself, and the consonant, structure. Together they built form from spirit. But modern man, obsessed with precision over presence, dismantled this alchemy. Grammar replaced grace, information replaced invocation. The world began to speak about truth rather than from it. Every era leaves its linguistic scars. The medieval soul feared sin, so language was weighed down with guilt. The industrial soul worshipped progress, so words became utilitarian, efficient, stripped of poetry. And now, in the digital age, language has become acceleration itself. We text, post, comment, reply, but seldom converse. Our words no longer travel through breath. They leap across circuits, detached from body and soul. Communication has become simulation. The tone is missing, the pause erased, the gaze absent. Words without warmth cannot heal. They may inform, but they cannot transform. Steiner called this loss the freezing of speech. It mirrors the hardening of the soul under materialism. When speech no longer flows from moral feeling, it becomes cold light. Clever, but lifeless. Politicians use it to command, advertisers to seduce, the media to divide. Each distortion severs sound from sincerity, until truth itself becomes a matter of branding. Beware the age, Steiner warned, when words are no longer trusted. That age has arrived. We analyze tone, decode subtext, doubt every statement, and rightly so. The word divorced from soul has turned into a weapon. Yet Steiner did not despair. He believed that every corruption hides a seed of redemption. Just as disease provokes healing, distortion invites renewal. The antidote to dead speech is not silence alone, but living speech. Words spoken from conscience, imagination, and inner warmth. When you speak truth with reverence, your words regain vibration. They carry presence. The listener feels not merely informed, but touched. This is not poetry, it is physics of spirit. Steiner said that true words ripple through the etheric world like stones cast into still water. The echo of sincerity extends beyond hearing, rearranging invisible patterns of harmony. To reclaim this power, one must first purify intention. Before you speak, ask, why am I saying this? Is it to impress, to defend, to escape silence? Or is it to reveal something of the eternal through sound? Each motive carries its own frequency. Words born of ego fall heavy. Words born of truth rise like song. The soul recognizes the difference immediately. You feel it. a quiet resonance in the chest when sincerity strikes. It is the forgotten music of meaning. Language, Steiner said, should not only describe reality, but redeem it. Every sentence is an opportunity to re-enchant the world. When you say thank you with presence, the vibration of gratitude travels farther than your voice. When you say I love you with awareness, you align with the creative word that sustains existence. To speak consciously is to participate in the Logos itself. This is the task of the future human being, to restore language to its original luminosity. Science, again, stumbles toward this truth. Acoustic researchers now know that tone alters matter. Psychologists confirm that words can heal or harm the body. The power of suggestion, the placebo effect, all reveal that language is not abstract but energetic. Steiner would say, you are only rediscovering what the ancients sang. The human voice is an instrument of transformation. It can carry despair or resurrection depending on the soul behind it. The danger of the coming age, he warned, is that the machine will imitate speech perfectly. Artificial voices, synthetic poets, digital prophets, all speaking without spirit. Humanity will face a choice, to compete with the imitation or to deepen authenticity beyond imitation's reach. The future of truth will depend not on eloquence, but on presence. The living word will distinguish itself not by perfection, but by warmth. So, the next time you speak, remember, language was never meant to explain, it was meant to create. Each phrase builds or breaks worlds, each tone blesses or burdens. The mouth is a temple, the tongue a flame, and the only way to cleanse this fire is through consciousness. When you speak with awareness, even ordinary words regain sacred weight. The distortion reverses, the word lives again. In the end, Steiner said, redemption of the world begins not through silence or rebellion, but through speech transfigured. When humanity once more speaks from the soul, when truth sounds warmer than lies and kindness louder than chaos, language will become light again. And in that light, the world will remember what it once knew, that every word, spoken or unspoken, is an echo of creation saying endlessly to itself, let there be. Steiner said that humanity will not be redeemed by learning how to speak more beautifully, but by remembering how to listen. For listening is the first act of love and the last art of the soul. To listen deeply is to invite being into consciousness, to make space for truth to arrive. But modern man has forgotten this sacred art. We hear everything, yet listen to nothing. We are flooded with noise, information, opinion, 1,000 voices clamoring at once, each fighting to be right, none willing to be silent long enough to understand. Listening has become a passive skill, a background function. Yet for the soul, it is the highest discipline. In the spiritual world, Steiner said, the capacity to listen determines the capacity to perceive. The higher beings do not see as we do. They hear the harmony or dissonance of moral tone. They perceive souls as music, clear, chaotic, or silent. To develop spiritual perception, then, one must first learn to hear not the content of speech, but its vibration. What does the tone of a person's voice reveal about their inner weather? What does the rhythm of silence between words tell you about their truth? This kind of listening is not social politeness, it is clairaudience of the heart. To listen truly, one must suspend self. Most people, Steiner said, do not listen, they wait. They listen only long enough to prepare a response. True listening, however, is a form of surrender. It requires entering the other's soundscape as if it were your own. It means releasing judgment, argument, and agenda. In that release, something astonishing happens. You begin to feel the soul of the other speaking through their words, often despite them. The tone carries more truth than the logic. The breath reveals more sincerity than the vocabulary. The listener becomes a vessel for meaning to be born anew. This is why the mysteries trained disciples to listen before they were allowed to speak. The initiate had to learn to hear vibration in silence, to perceive thought as sound. Only then could they form words worthy of creation. For to listen is to rehearse divinity. God, Steiner said, listens eternally. Creation itself is the echo of divine attention. The Logos did not begin by speaking, he wrote. It began by hearing the possibility of being. To listen consciously is to participate in that same creative act, to help the world articulate itself through awareness. But the modern ear is wounded. Centuries of noise have numbed it. We have been trained to filter, to multitask, to half-attend. Our hearing is efficient, but our understanding is shallow. The constant hum of technology dulls the subtle frequencies where meaning hides. Even in conversation, we are distracted. Eyes flicking to screens, thoughts to self. Steiner warned that this would happen, that as machines began to mimic life's rhythm, humanity would lose its own. The cure, he said, lies not in retreat, but in rhythm. The deliberate cultivation of quiet attention amid sound. Begin small. Listen to a single sound until it disappears. The ticking of a clock, the rustle of leaves, your own breath. Do not analyze, merge. Feel how each vibration alters you. Then extend this awareness to people. When someone speaks, listen not for agreement or disagreement, but for resonance. Where in your body do their words land? What temperature do they carry? Warmth, coldness, heat, distance? In this way, Listening becomes moral perception. You begin to sense the invisible currents between souls, the unspoken harmony or discord shaping every exchange. Steiner believed that moral evolution itself depends on this awakening of the ear. For empathy is born not of thought, but of tone. You cannot think compassion into being, you must hear it. When you truly listen, the boundary between self and other dissolves. Their pain vibrates within you. Their joy sings in your own chest. This resonance is not sentimentality. It is recognition. The same consciousness animates both. Listening, then, becomes a sacrament, a participation in the unity of all things. In the Waldorf schools he founded, Steiner trained teachers to listen to children not as students, but as souls in translation. A child's tone, he said, reveals more about their destiny than any test. The way they breathe when they draw, the way they pause before speaking, each is a cipher. To listen to a child is to overhear heaven remembering itself. This form of listening does not correct, it witnesses. It gives the soul permission to unfold naturally. Science now edges toward this ancient wisdom. Therapists speak of active listening. Neurologists study how empathy reshapes the brain. They discover that listening changes both speaker and listener, aligning their heartbeats and brainwaves. Steiner would say, of course, attention is vibration. Consciousness tunes itself to what it attends. This is the true power, and danger, of listening. You become what you hear. If you listen constantly to noise, you become noise. If you listen to truth, you become truth. The re-education of hearing, therefore, is a moral act. You must choose your sonic diet with care. Seek silence daily. Listen to voices that elevate, not inflame. Listen to music that breathes, not agitates. Listen to nature until its rhythm becomes your own heartbeat. And above all, listen inwardly, to the tone beneath your thoughts, to the breath of your own being. There, in that faint hum behind everything, lies the forgotten language of the soul whispering your real name. When the ear of the heart awakens, the entire world changes timbre. You begin to hear spirit in conversation, destiny in coincidence, God in the pause between sentences. The world, once noisy and dull, becomes a living orchestra. And you, the humble listener, realize that your attention is what gives it meaning. Steiner said the end of evolution will not be a human who speaks all languages, but one who understands all silences. For listening is the art of love made audible. And when humanity learns again to listen, to each other, to nature, to its own depths, the word that has long waited in silence will speak once more through us, not as doctrine, but as harmony. At the end of all speech, Steiner said, there remains only one word, the word that speaks the world into being. It is not a sound carried by air, but vibration carried by consciousness. Every human being, knowingly or not, repeats that word with every thought, every emotion, every act of will. Creation is not a distant event. It happens wherever awareness shapes reality. In the beginning was the Word, wrote John, and Steiner added, and that beginning never ended. The universe continues to utter itself through us. We are its syllables, its rhythm, its unfinished sentence. To understand this is to grasp the ultimate responsibility of being human. Every thought you think, every tone you speak, every feeling you release into the world becomes substance in the invisible realms before solidifying as destiny. The Word creates, always. The question is whether it creates light or shadow. Speech, in its highest form, is moral architecture. To speak carelessly is to scatter debris across the cosmos. To speak with awareness is to build temples of meaning. The soul, Steiner taught, is not judged after death by what it did, but by what it said, for words echo longer than deeds. They linger in the etheric atmosphere, weaving futures. In ancient times, humanity still knew this. The priests of Egypt guarded the secret name of Ra, because to utter it wrongly would disturb the harmony of the world. The poets of Greece believed that a poorly spoken word could anger the muses. Even in Christian mysticism, the Amen was not conclusion, but confirmation, a resonance-sealing spiritual law. Words were spells not because they manipulated energy, but because they expressed it truthfully. The speaker and the spoken were one. That unity is what modern man has forgotten. He speaks without presence, and so his words fall to the ground like stones. But when word and being reunite, Steiner said, the miraculous reappears. Healing arises not from technique, but from tone. A simple sentence, when spoken from love, carries more power than 1,000 incantations. I forgive you. I understand. I am here. These phrases seem small, yet they rearrange the invisible structure of another's world. They are echoes of the creative word at work. To speak from the soul is to recreate the world in miniature, to restore, through sincerity, the balance that thoughtless speech has broken. Modern physics, in its own language, now gestures toward this truth. Quantum fields vibrate, particles respond to observation. Reality itself behaves like an echo of consciousness. The scientific mind calls it probability, but Steiner would call it logos, the eternal conversation between mind and matter. The human voice, when aligned with moral will, does not merely describe reality, It participates in shaping it. To speak is to sculpt time. And yet, the word that creates is not limited to speech. It hides in silence, in gesture, in intention. The look you give, the way you move, the energy you carry, all are forms of language. Even thoughts, inaudible to ears, sound loudly in the subtle world. Steiner taught that advanced beings hear human thinking as music. A single pure thought, born of love, brightens the astral plane. A hateful one darkens it. This is not metaphor, it is metaphysics. To live consciously is to realize that you are never not speaking. The tragedy of our age, he warned, is that humanity creates unconsciously. Our collective speech, media, politics, conversation, vibrates with fear, irony, sarcasm. These tones shape the very atmosphere we breathe. The storms in nature, the restlessness of the earth, the unease of animals. Steiner said these mirror the dissonance of human language. The cosmos listens, it responds, and it suffers when our words lose their sacred tone. But redemption is possible, and it begins in the smallest act, awareness before utterance. Pause before you speak. Let silence shape intention. Feel the weight of what is about to cross the threshold of your mouth. Ask yourself, does this word build or break, heal or harden, reveal or conceal? This moment of awareness is prayer disguised as hesitation. It reclaims language for the divine. When words arise from such stillness, they regain their original luminosity. The goal, Steiner said, is not eloquence, but purity. To speak not many words, but necessary ones. The less you say, the more vibration each carries. Like the breath of creation itself, the sacred word is simple, yet infinite. Even the whisper of truth can travel through centuries, igniting hearts long after the body is dust. Every prophet, every artist, every teacher who has ever moved humanity has merely remembered how to align with this current. They did not invent truth. They translated it. And so the evolution of consciousness will culminate not in silence alone, nor in speech alone, but in their union. The silence that gives birth to the word, and the word that returns gratefully to silence. This is the full circle of creation. Every human being, Steiner said, is destined to become conscious co-creator, a living syllable in the divine poem reciting itself back to its source. When you finally speak from that place, when your voice trembles not with fear but with awareness, the world listens differently. Animals pause, the air thickens, even time seems to bend slightly around sincerity. You realize that you were never learning to speak. You were remembering the speech that made you. The Logos breathes through your lungs, and for a moment, God speaks your name back to you in your own tone. That is the secret language of the soul completed. Silence remembered, sound redeemed, creation awakened. The word that creates is the word that remembers, and it has been waiting, through all your lifetimes, for you to listen deeply enough to say it again.